Hey, I'm Nate Savage, and in this guitar lesson, I'm going to teach you 5 tips for making your bar chords sound great. I know that a lot of beginner guitarists and a lot of guitar players that have been playing for a while too have trouble getting their bar chords to sound good, so I wanted to put a lesson together that kind of addresses the issues that keep popping up over and over again. I get emails all the time from people saying, Nate, I don't know what to do. I've been trying to make these bar chords, but I just can't get them to sound good and clear. If that's you, this lesson is going to be great for you. And you know, I'm using an acoustic guitar. It's not even mine, it's my buddy's. I borrowed it from him. The action's quite a bit higher than what I'm used to playing on, so I just want to encourage you, if you have a guitar like this that's not, super expensive, you can still make great sounding bar chords. The first tip I have for you is horizontal finger placement. And by that, I mean where your finger that you're making the bar with falls in between the frets. And technique is pretty important when we're talking about bar chords too. So let's go through some technique tips as we talk about horizontal finger placement. So first of all, just do this. Put your hand out, really relaxed motion like this, not curved too far either way, like you're holding an apple or something. Bring your hand up, put it right on the back of the neck. You don't want it hanging over. Otherwise, you're never gonna get a good clamp going to where you can make a great sounding bar. You want it right behind the neck to where you get this really good kind of clamp going like that, right? Make sure to do that. Also, you're not gonna wanna kink your wrist too far one way or the other. If you kink it too far this way, it's gonna start hurting after a while in your wrist, right? If you kink it too far the other way, you're never gonna have enough leverage and you're never gonna make a great sounding bar chord too. So remember that. My wrist is pretty straight. It's curved a little bit, and my thumb's right on the back of the neck. Now, as far as horizontal finger placement, what I'm talking about is you want your finger right behind the fret. The farther back you go, the harder it gets to push it down. And if you get towards the back of the fret, it's almost impossible to get strings sounding good there. They just get buzzy. I'm pushing as hard as I can right there, and it's still not quite right sounding. So horizontal finger placement, you're gonna wanna be right behind that fret. The second tip I have for you is vertical finger placement. And if you look on your fingers, everybody has different fingers, and we all have these little creases here that are kind of trouble spots for when we're making bar chords. If a string gets caught in between there, we have to push down way harder, and it's way harder to get those strings to ring out clearly. So by vertical finger placement, I just mean that you're gonna have to experiment with your own finger and your own body and see where the best positioning for your finger is so those creases affect your bar as little as possible. I know players like myself, I use pretty much just the tip of my fingers hanging over the fretboard right there. I know players where a ton of their finger is hanging over the fretboard right there. It depends what works for you and where your creases fall, and you want to minimize the effects of those creases on the sound of your bar as much as possible. So another little tip I have for you along the lines of this is when you're making a bar chord, experiment with that positioning, that vertical finger placement. Put the bar on first, and then put the shape on. And do the exact opposite. Put the shape on first, and then put the bar on. Experiment with that placement, and find out what works for you. The third tip I have for you is to tilt your finger. And let me show you what I mean by that. If you've been experimenting with your vertical and horizontal placement, another thing that you're gonna wanna do is tilt your finger back a little bit to where you're more on the bony edge of your finger right there, the harder part. If you make a bar just on the very bottom of your finger, on the fleshy part, it's softer, so it's a little harder to get a good solid sounding bar out of there. If you tilt your finger back just a little bit, it's gonna be way easier for you to get a good sounding bar. And another tip I have to help you with your tilting your finger back and experimenting with your placement is a lot of people, when they're trying to make bars, their elbow is out. And that can give you a lot of problems, and it can make things harder than they should be. So drop your elbow down to your body, pull it in close. That'll put your hand in a better position to experiment with your finger placement. And when you drop your elbow, it helps the weight of your arm come down and help you with this clamp. And it actually helps you make that bar too, the weight of your arm. Tip number 4 is building strength. And a lot of times when people are learning bar chords, they'll jump right into trying to learn the shapes. And then it'll sound bad, right? They won't have all the notes ringing out and they're wondering why. Well, one thing that can really help you overall is just taking some time to just work on your bar and build the strength and this muscle in your hand and your arms to make that bar really strong. So set aside 5 or 10 minutes a day for a couple weeks and just work on making your bar really clean and strong up and down the fretboard. Work your way up and back down. And if at first your bar doesn't sound really good, don't be afraid to come back with a second finger here and help with that bar. That can be a good stepping stone to building that strength in your hand and your arm. And eventually, you'll get that clamp to where it's strong enough to make that bar on its own without your second finger. Tip number 5 is get your guitar set up by a professional. The action on a guitar, like I showed you earlier, is how high the strings are off the fretboard. On this guitar, it's a little bit higher than I'm used to, quite a bit higher than I'm used to, so it's a little bit harder to make bars. And if that's the case for you, if you think your action is just too high, you'll probably just want to go get your guitar set up, take it into your local music store. They'll set it up, make it play as easily as possible. Your bar chords will be easier to play. Everything will be easier to play and you'll enjoy playing more. Also, if you get your guitar set up and it's still just too hard for you to make clean sounding bar chords, what you can do is lower your string gauge 1 notch. These are probably 12 gauge strings. If it was way too hard for me, I'd probably go down to 11s maybe for a few weeks. Try it on that. And then once you can do it on 11s, you can throw some 12s back on there and see how much your strength is built. Now, to help you apply what we've been talking about here, I have a jam track for you. It's a really simple jam track that spends 4 measures on a G chord and then 4 measures on a C chord. What you can do, and what helps a lot when you're trying to learn new chords, is just limit your options to 2 chords. That way you can work on maybe a G bar chord and then go to maybe a C open chord, something that's a little easier. And just working going back and forth between those 2 chords. Or you can do a G open chord and try a C bar chord. Either way, whichever one works for you. Here's just a little example of how I would do this. Remember, everyone's hands are different. Some people have really small hands. You may have really large hands. Everybody's going to have their own unique challenges when it comes to making bar chords. Just remember the tips I've given you in this lesson, and remember that consistent practice is really important when seeing progress with these kind of chords. If yours don't sound great right now, that's okay. Keep working at it and it'll get better over time. If you like this lesson and want to see more lessons like this, let me know by leaving a comment below. I just launched a brand new guitar lesson series that you can get right now for free. Just go to guitarsystem.com/free-series and I'll see you there.